I still remember the sound of the wind that night. It was soft at first, brushing against the trees outside our cabin, but somewhere deep inside, I knew it was carrying something heavier than air. It's strange how a mother can sense when her child is about to break her heart. Maybe it's a feeling that lives under the skin, quiet but undeniable. That evening, my husband and I were supposed to be celebrating our anniversary. 40 years together. Not perfect years, but full ones. We'd cooked dinner, laughed about old photos, and talked about how proud we were of our son, Daniel. He had become everything we once dreamed of: successful, respected, living in a big city with a wife and little boy of his own. Or so we thought. When he called that week, his voice was sweet, maybe too sweet. "Mom, Dad, you both deserve a break," he'd said. "Why don't you take a few days at the old cabin? I'll make sure everything's ready for you." His tone was full of care, and we didn't question it. After all, what kind of parents would suspect that their own son, their only child, had darkness in his heart? I remember packing the same way I always did: a sweater for the cool nights, his father's old thermos, the one Daniel had used on camping trips as a boy. I even smiled at the thought of him running through those same woods years ago, his laughter echoing against the trees. But when we arrived, something felt off. The air was still. The cabin looked too clean, too prepared, like it was waiting for something that wasn't peace. My husband noticed it too, but neither of us spoke. We just went inside, thinking maybe we were being silly. That night, the storm came in. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rolled like footsteps in the distance. Then, the sound of the car, our son's car. He wasn't supposed to be there, but I heard the tires crunching against the gravel. Slow, deliberate. My husband started to rise, but I stopped him. "Let's just wait," I whispered. A mother always wants to believe her child is good, even when every instinct says otherwise. Moments later, the world exploded into fire and glass. The smell of gasoline, the roar of flames, the sound of my husband's voice calling my name through smoke and chaos. We never saw Daniel's face that night, but we didn't have to. We knew. And as we stumbled into the cold rain, coughing and trembling, I remember thinking, how does a heart survive something like this? We didn't die that night, though maybe a part of us did, and in the days that followed, as the police searched the ashes, we made a choice I never thought I'd have to make. We decided to let the world believe we were gone. When I was younger, I believed that love alone could raise a good man. I thought that if we poured kindness and honesty into our child, he would grow into someone who carried those same values. My husband, Michael, used to say, "He'll make mistakes, but as long as he comes home, we'll be all right." That became our unspoken rule. No matter what happened, Daniel could always come home. And for a long time, that was true. He was a good boy, quiet but curious. He used to sit with me in the kitchen while I baked, asking questions about everything, from how sugar melted in butter to why I smiled when it rained. Because, I'd tell him, the rain makes everything start over again. He used to love that idea of starting over. When he grew older, he became ambitious. Not in a cruel way at first, but in the way young people chase the world before it hardens them. He studied finance, got a job in the city, and started sending money home even when we didn't ask. "You've done enough for me," he'd say. "Now it's my turn." And every time I'd feel that quiet pride only mothers understand, the one that sits in your chest like a small light. But with success came distance. Calls turned into texts, visits turned into excuses. The house that once rang with his laughter became quiet. I tried to tell myself it was just life, that children grow up, that silence doesn't mean love has disappeared. but deep down, I knew something had changed. The first real sign came 2 years before the accident. He came home for Thanksgiving, late, with his new wife, Clara. She was polite, maybe too polite, the kind of woman who smiles because she has to. She hugged me lightly, as if afraid to wrinkle her dress. During dinner, she hardly touched her food. I remember noticing how Daniel looked at her, not with love, but with calculation, as if she were another achievement on a long list. Michael didn't see it then. He was just happy to have our son home. He poured him a glass of wine and started talking about the fishing trips they used to take. Daniel laughed, but it wasn't his laugh. It was sharp, hollow, practiced. Later that night, after they went to bed, I told Michael I felt uneasy. He kissed my hand and said, "You're worrying again, Anna. He's just finding his way." But I wasn't wrong. Over the next year, money became a quiet shadow in our family. Daniel stopped asking how we were and started asking about the land. The old cabin, the savings, the inheritance that had sat untouched since my parents passed. I didn't think much of it at first. He said he wanted to help manage things, to make it more efficient. But when we said we weren't ready to hand it over, something cold slipped into his voice. A few months later, he stopped calling altogether. No messages on birthdays, no visits, just a polite text on holidays, short and distant. I used to sit by the window, watching the mailbox like I used to when he was away at college, but there was never a letter, never a card, just silence. Michael tried to stay strong. He said we had each other, and that was enough. But I could see the worry in his eyes. He missed their talks, their shared jokes, the sound of Daniel calling him Dad. One evening, I found Michael sitting alone in the garage, looking at an old fishing rod. "He doesn't need us anymore," he said quietly. "He has his own life now." I wanted to tell him that wasn't true, that no matter how far a child goes, a parent's love stays the same, but my voice caught in my throat. Then came the call, the one that would change everything. Daniel's tone was suddenly warm again, full of affection we hadn't heard in years. "Mom, Dad, I've been thinking. You both need a break. Go spend a few days at the cabin. Just relax. I'll take care of everything." I remember smiling as I hung up the phone, relieved that maybe, after all this time, he was coming back to us. Not in body, but in heart. I told Michael it was a good sign. "Maybe he misses us," I said. Michael nodded, but there was a look in his eyes I couldn't quite place, a flicker of doubt, quickly hidden. We left the next morning. The sky was pale blue, the kind of day that feels innocent. I packed the old thermos, sandwiches, and Daniel's favorite blanket, the one he used as a boy. It felt symbolic, like we were carrying the past with us, even if we didn't realize it would soon be burned away. When we arrived, the cabin looked beautiful, almost too beautiful. Fresh paint, new curtains, wood stacked neatly by the porch. Daniel had even stocked the fridge. Everything was perfect. Unnaturally perfect. I remember touching the countertop and whispering, "He really thought of everything." Michael gave me a faint smile. "Yeah," he said softly, almost like he was preparing for something. I didn't understand what he meant then, but later that night, when the fire roared too high and the walls began to crack from heat, his words came back to me, and I realized he had been right all along. That evening, the air felt still, too still, the kind of stillness that makes you whisper without knowing why. The sun dipped behind the trees, turning the lake outside our cabin to gold. I stood by the window, watching the light fade, and for a moment, I felt peace. The kind that comes when you believe everything might be okay again. Michael sat by the fireplace, reading an old book. The room smelled of pine and the faint sweetness of the pie I had baked earlier. I remember thinking how ordinary it all felt, and how much I had missed that feeling. Ordinary was beautiful. ordinary was safe. Or so I thought. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "Hope you're comfortable. Don't forget to light the fire before bed. The nights get cold out there." I smiled, touched by the small kindness, but Michael looked up when he heard the chime. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "He's just checking in." He nodded, but didn't smile. I noticed his hands resting on his knees, tense. Strange. He's never been one to remind us of anything. I brushed it off. Maybe it was his way of showing care. Maybe guilt had softened him. I wanted to believe that. Parents always want to believe the best, even when something inside them knows better. He didn't answer. He just pulled me close, his voice breaking as he said, "Pretend we're dead." At first, I didn't understand. "What?" I asked, my voice trembling. "If he did this," he said, "he'll come back to make sure it worked. We can't go home. Not yet." Those words felt unreal, like we were characters in a story too cruel to belong to us. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Daniel had called us here. Daniel had reminded us to light the fire. Daniel had made sure every exit was locked. We moved through the forest, away from the flames. I could barely see, barely walk. But Michael's hand stayed on mine, guiding me through the dark. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Hours later, we reached the road. No cars passed. The night was silent except for the crackle of fire behind us and the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Michael flagged down a truck near dawn, a farmer heading to the next town. He offered us water and drove us to a small motel. When we got there, Michael used a fake name. "We can't call anyone yet," he said quietly. "Not until we know why." That first night in the motel was the longest of my life. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of Daniel in my mind. His smile as a boy, his laughter when he learned to ride a bike, his tears when we dropped him off for college. How did that child, our child, become someone who could do this? The next morning, Michael made a call. Not to Daniel, but to a lawyer friend he trusted. He told him about the fire, about the missing key, the extinguisher. The lawyer was silent for a long time before saying, "Michael, you need to stay hidden. There's something you don't know." He wouldn't say more on the phone, only that he'd meet us in person the next day. I spent the rest of that day sitting by the motel window, watching strangers pass. None of them knew that two people sitting inside were supposed to be dead. When the lawyer arrived, he looked pale. He handed Michael a folder, property papers, bank documents, and a few printed emails. My name was on one of them. So was Daniel's. It turned out our son had been in serious debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars. He'd taken out loans in our name, using fake signatures, and the only way to cover them was through our life insurance and property. I felt my stomach drop as I read those words. I wanted to deny it, to say there must be a mistake, but there it was. His email trail, his bank transfers, his plans. He had planned everything. The trip, the timing, the accident. Michael sat there in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the papers. Then he folded them neatly and said, "We can't go to the police yet. Not until we know if he believes we're gone." I wanted to scream, to cry, to find my son and ask him how he could turn against us, but my voice stayed locked in my chest. The only sound that came out was a whisper. "He's our son." Michael looked at me then, tears finally falling down his face. He said, "Not anymore. Not the boy we raised." We spent the next few days hiding in that motel, afraid to turn on the TV, afraid to step outside.
The news eventually confirmed what we already knew. The fire had been ruled accidental. 2 presumed dead. Our names, our lives, gone. And in a strange, painful way, it felt like freedom. We were ghosts now, free to grieve, but also forced to face the truth that the child we had loved, the man we had trusted, had chosen greed over love. But even then, even in that hollow silence that filled the room after the fire, I couldn't hate him. I wanted to. I wanted to let anger take over, but all I could feel was sorrow and a mother's ache that never fades.
Days turned into weeks, and the world carried on as if we had never existed. Our faces were on the local news for a few nights. Reporters stood by the ashes of our cabin, talking about how an elderly couple tragically lost their lives in a fire. They showed old photos, ones Daniel must have given them, smiling faces, family dinners, birthdays, all of it now framed by tragedy. From the small motel room, I watched it all in silence. Michael didn't say much either. He spent most of his time pacing, making quiet calls on a prepaid phone he'd bought in cash. I could see the war inside him, the need to act, to expose Daniel, fighting against the disbelief that our own son had done this. We lived like shadows, always keeping the curtains closed, eating plain food, barely speaking. Sometimes when I lay awake at night, I'd hear Michael whispering prayers under his breath. He wasn't a religious man, not really, but grief makes believers out of all of us. One morning, he handed me a folded piece of paper. "He's cleaned out the joint account," he said quietly. "Every cent." I nodded slowly, feeling a hollow space open in my chest. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was the final confirmation that this wasn't a mistake. He'd burned everything we had, our home, our trust, our past, and now he was taking what was left. A few days later, Michael found something else, a social media post. A picture of Daniel and his girlfriend standing outside a new house. "A fresh start," the caption read. "Life has a way of rewarding courage." Courage. That word stung more than anything else. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. He looked happy, relaxed. The same boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street now smiled in front of a home he'd bought with ashes. Michael closed the laptop and said, "We need to go see him." I turned to him in shock. "See him? Michael, he thinks we're dead." "Exactly. That's the only reason we can do it. He won't be looking for ghosts." I didn't argue. Maybe I should have. But deep down, I needed to see him too. Not for revenge, just to understand how the boy we raised became a man capable of erasing us. We drove to the small town where Daniel lived now, a quiet suburb lined with oak trees and white fences. The kind of place where people smiled at each other and waved from their porches. The irony wasn't lost on me. We parked across the street from his house. Through the window, I could see him moving around inside, coffee in hand, phone pressed to his ear. He looked older, harder. There was a sharpness in his face that hadn't been there before. And then I saw her, his girlfriend, Emily. She was young, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. She looked nothing like someone who could be part of a plan so cruel. But then again, maybe she didn't know. Maybe she believed whatever story he told her about his late parents. We watched for a while, hidden behind tinted glass. Every movement, every word we could catch through the open window felt like a stab. At one point, Emily came out with a tray of coffee and said, "Your parents would have loved this place." He froze for a moment, then forced to smile. "Yeah," he said softly, "they're always with me." I wanted to scream, to throw open the car door and tell her the truth, to tell her that the man she loved had tried to kill his parents. But I didn't. I just sat there, trembling, tears streaming down my face as Michael reached over and held my hand. We left after an hour. The drive back was silent. Neither of us could find words big enough to fit the grief. That night, Michael made a decision. He called the lawyer again, and they met in secret. When he came back, he sat at the edge of the bed and said, "He forged documents, took loans, used our property as collateral. If we come forward, he'll go to prison." I stared at him, trying to process the weight of what he was saying. "Then do it," I said. "He deserves to pay for what he's done." He looked at me, eyes heavy with sorrow. "And if we do, our son will die in prison. The world will know what he did. Everyone he loves will turn away from him." I said nothing, because deep down, I knew what he meant. Punishment wouldn't undo what had been done. It wouldn't rebuild the life he'd taken from us. It would only destroy what little remained of the boy we used to love. The next morning, we went for a walk near the river behind the motel. The sun was rising, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Michael stopped and said, "We've been given a second chance. Maybe it's not for revenge. Maybe it's to forgive." His words felt impossible. Forgive? How do you forgive someone who looked you in the eyes and decided you didn't deserve to live? But as I stood there, watching the sunlight reflect off the water, I realized something. Forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about freeing ourselves from the weight of hate. That evening, we wrote a letter. We didn't send it, but it helped. We wrote everything we felt: the betrayal, the pain, the disbelief. And at the end, we wrote 3 words that I never thought I could say again. "We forgive you." We decided to move far away, to a small coastal town where no one knew our names. We sold what little we had left through a friend and started again under new identities. It was quiet there, peaceful. Some days the waves were the only voices we heard. For months we lived like that, ghosts rebuilding a new life. But inside, a small part of me still wondered about him. Was he happy? Did guilt ever visit him at night? And then one day, an envelope arrived. No return address, just our names, our real names, written in familiar handwriting. I felt my heart stop as I opened it. Inside was a single note. "I know you're alive. I'm sorry. I can't undo it, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better. I love you." There was no signature, no address, just those words. I read it over and over until the ink blurred with my tears. Michael stood behind me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "He knows," he said softly. And for the first time since the fire, I didn't feel fear, just a strange, quiet relief. Because maybe somehow forgiveness had reached him after all. We didn't know what to do with the letter at first. I placed it on the kitchen table beside the vase of wildflowers Michael had picked that morning. It looked so out of place, that small, folded piece of paper, sitting quietly in the middle of a life we had built from ashes. For hours, I just looked at it. The handwriting was the same as it had been on every birthday card Daniel ever made me when he was small. The same loops, the same slant. My hands shook every time I tried to touch it. Part of me wanted to believe it was a cruel joke, maybe a mistake, but deep down, I knew it was real. After the letter came, something shifted between Michael and me. We stopped whispering about the past as if it were something we had to hide. This silence that used to hang heavy in our home started to lighten. One morning, Michael poured me coffee and said, "Maybe this is the ending we were supposed to get." I didn't know how to respond. It wasn't the kind of ending anyone would choose, but maybe it was one that forced us to see what really mattered. Peace, not punishment. Life in that little coastal town had a rhythm of its own. Every morning, I'd open the curtains and let the sunlight pour in. The air smelled like salt and rain. The sea was our neighbor now, steady, endless, forgiving. Sometimes when the tide came in, I'd walk down to the shore and stand barefoot on the wet sand. I'd close my eyes and listen to the waves, to the gulls, to the quiet that didn't hurt anymore. And I'd think of Daniel. I didn't think of the fire or the betrayal. I thought of him as a boy, running into my arms with scraped knees, bringing me dandelions, asking if heaven was real. That version of him still existed somewhere in the folds of my heart, untouched by what came later. Maybe that was the part I chose to forgive. A few months passed before another letter arrived. This one had a return address, a city hours away. It was Daniel again. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what I might read. Inside was a photograph. He was standing beside a small community center, wearing a plain jacket and holding a sign that read, "Rebuild Together." On the back, he had written, "I've been volunteering here. I'm trying, Mom. I really am." I sat on the couch, holding that photo to my chest. Michael came in and stood behind me, his shadow falling across the picture. "He's trying," I whispered. Michael nodded. "That's all any of us can do." From that day, letters came every few months. Never long, never demanding. Just small pieces of his life, a new job, a picture of the center he'd built, sometimes even stories about the people he helped. It was as if he was rebuilding himself one act of kindness at a time. He never asked us to come back. Maybe he knew we couldn't. Not yet. But he always ended the same way. "I hope you're both at peace." And in a way, we were. The bitterness that once sat heavy in my chest began to ease. I started gardening again. I filled our small yard with lavender and hydrangeas, Daniel's favorites. Michael started fixing old boats at the harbor for a few extra dollars. The locals thought we were just an old couple who'd retired by the sea, and we let them think that. Sometimes they'd invite us for tea or to watch their children play. It was nice, being known for something simple again. It's strange how life continues, even after something you thought would destroy you. Seasons change, flowers bloom again, the sea keeps moving. Sometimes I sit by the window, watching the light shift across the water, and I think about all that has happened. There was a time when I believed my story had ended on that mountain, the day our son pushed us off the edge. But now I see it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a long, slow lesson about love, pain, and forgiveness. People talk about forgiveness like it's something soft, like lighting a candle or saying a prayer. But it isn't. It's heavy. It's hard. It's something you carry, again and again, until one day it stops hurting as much. There were years when I couldn't even say Daniel's name without feeling that old ache rise up in my throat. But grief changes shape over time. It doesn't disappear, it just becomes quieter, easier to live with. Sometimes when I walk down to the harbor, I see parents holding their children's hands, laughing, arguing, living. It makes me think of how fragile everything is. One choice, one secret, one desperate moment can shatter a family. And yet somehow love still finds a way to survive under the ruins. When Daniel came back that first time, I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. But trust isn't something that happens all at once. It's built quietly, piece by piece, in the ways someone shows up. In letters, in honesty, in effort. Over the years, he did all that. He never asked for forgiveness. He just lived as if he was trying to earn it every single day. Last month, I went to visit him. He'd moved into a small home not far from the city, working at the same community center he'd written about. He showed me around, the shelves of food donations, the bright murals on the walls, the children laughing in the courtyard. He smiled shyly and said, "I thought maybe Dad would have liked this." And I knew he was right. Michael would have loved it. The simple kindness of it all.
We sat together afterward, sharing tea and silence. He told me he still had nightmares sometimes about the fire, about our faces disappearing in the smoke. I reached across the table and took his hand. I said, "The past can't hurt you forever. You've already paid for it by trying to do better." He nodded, and for the first time I saw peace in his eyes. Not complete, not perfect, but real. When I came home that night, the sea was restless, the wind strong. I stood on the porch, feeling the salt air against my skin, and thought about Michael. About everything we had lost, and everything we had somehow found again. I whispered into the wind, "He's doing better now." Maybe somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Michael heard me. I like to think he smiled. Now, every evening, I light a small candle by the window, not for grief, but for remembrance, for the family we once were, and the peace we fought so hard to find. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to love even when the reasons not to seem stronger. It means freeing yourself, not the one who hurt you, but your own heart from the weight of hate. If there's one thing I've come to understand, it's this. People break, families fall apart, but love, real love, doesn't die. It just waits quietly until we're ready to see it again. Maybe you've felt that kind of silence before, the kind that comes after the shouting stops, when all that's left is the sound of your own heart trying to make sense of everything. If you have, I want you to know this. Peace is possible. Even after betrayal, even after loss, even after fire. Because forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the purest form of strength. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can ever do is simply choose to let go. The end.